Hello everyone and welcome back. So in this final part of our environment tutorial, we will move everything to Solaris and work on the shaders and on the lighting, and hopefully we will have a final render at the end. So yeah, let's get into it. So we will first need to separate these into parts, so meaning that we will have to give a name attribute to each piece. But before that, let's go into our, if you remember, we did the scattering of the rocks, and we had this issue where the connectivity was generating other IDs, let's say. So we don't actually need this connectivity because when we did the rocks, we actually created a class attribute, as you can see in here, in our loop. So we can use that. So if we get rid of this connectivity, we can actually use that. We use that class attribute as the seed. So as you can see, we should have a class attribute. And if we look at final result, we have in this case, the low poly. Let's enable the high poly, and we still have the same rocks. Next, we just need to play with the seed, but let's keep it like that for now. So we will need to start to name these. So in this first height field, we need to name it to terrain. So let's create a name, and we will name it to terrain. So we should have only a name attribute. That's fine. I'm going to also create here a mask, which will be where we will scatter the grass. So for that, let's create a point VOP. This will be really quick. And we will take the normal, and separate it, so vector to float. And let's look at the Y components on the CD. And now we need to fit it, so fit range, and play with the range in here. In this case, I'm going to set the source mean to a bit higher, so around 0.8, 0.9, something like this. And instead of outputting into the CD, we will create a bind export, and we will export it as mask grass. So we should have that attribute right now. Let's have a look. And we do. So this is where the grass will go. So we also have the mask along Z we will not need, and the river that we will need. So let's keep working on our naming. Now we need for the river geometry. And before that we will need some UVs. So let's read the UV texture. Let's look at the UVs. And this will be inverted, so we can set this to -1 and offset it again to the first one and reduce this to something like 0.4 to have the square grid. I'm not going to use this alpha, and I'm also going to name this, and I believe I called it river. Let's see, yeah, or in this case we can name it water. So this is the first part done. Let's look at the output. So we have the height field and the water, and we don't need to see the UVs, so that's fine. Now in here we have the bridge, I believe. Yes. So we need to start to name these appropriately. So in this case, first of all, I'm going to name this path geometry in here. So let's create a name, and I'm going to call it bridge path. And then in here, this will have the same material. Not in here, sorry. We need to actually separate these. So in here, we can name this as bridge stones. And then in here, we can do the same. So just copy this And we should have a name attribute. Let's see. We have for the stones and for the pet. That's fine. This will go in a single output, so we will import these all together instead of dividing it to different sections, since we have the name attribute. And now for these, we need to name, for the vines, we need to name this properly. So for the tree mesher, which is the vines, we can name it vines. And for this, we can name it not vines leaves or something like that, or just leaves. That's fine. These will also go together. And what do we have in here? Oh, we have these vines, and I already call it vines, so that's fine. These will also go in the same setup. And the next part will be, we will actually get rid of this scattering, so we will not import the rocks. We will do that in a separated instancer. So this is fine. And as far as this goes, we will also need that background plane. So let's name it the rain back name, and remove this. We won't need the scattering, so terrain back. And I guess this will be the final output. So a good idea is to file cache this, so file cache, and let's remove the time dependent cache and do environment diorama cache. Let's save this to disk, and we should have everything we need. So in this case we have more things. We could have cleaned that, but we have the mask grass, we have class attribute in case we need, we have the mask Z, and we should have a different name attribute for each part, so that is fine. And let me see here in these leaves, we don't actually need, we don't need this texture, but we will replace it anyway, so let's keep it for now. So let's name this out, and let's continue on the next part. So we have everything ready to move into Solaris, so let's copy this and move into Solaris. And now let's do a SOP import. I'm gonna call it this scene, and paste in here the pet. So this should get a bit slow because we have instances, so in the primitive definition we want to treat the packed primitives, not in here, so we want to treat here the packed primitives. Let's pause this. So we want to treat it as point instancer, and now it should be way smoother. These will actually create point instances for the leaves. And we should have the name attribute, so the bridge path, the stones, the instances, the terrain back. We also have for the vines and water. So that's fine. Now I also created a camera in SOPs, but we can do it here. So let's just set this to viewport size, set it to dark, and we can display the environment. And let me see the camera that I used, so we can just get in here something and create a camera, and we can move it a bit in, something like that. We can change it later, but let's keep it like that. So let's disable this, and we have a camera. Now we can start to create some of the lighting. In this case I'm going to use Karma Physical Sky. So let's set that up. So Karma Physical Sky, and do a Karma render settings. We will change this to XPU. That's fine for now. And we have the camera loaded, as you can see, camera 1. And we can probably start to have a look at this render and disable this. And let's change this. Let's go into this physical sky, and I'm first of all going to increase the exposure to 2.5. And I'll play with the angle of the light. So in this case, I'm gonna set the solar altitude to 27 and the azimuth to 70. And now we can also play with the angular size to have a bit of a softer shadows. So something like 5 will do. And what else did I change? In this case, I went to the sky, changed the turbidity to 8 to have this more flat look. And also with this blurring, I don't want to see these harsh transitions, so I'm gonna change that to something like 10. And we have something along these lines. Now, we could introduce our fog right now, properly to check how it looks, but I'm going to first create a material library. And let's create a carbon material builder. I'm gonna name it default matte. Gonna set this to a grayish value and increase the roughness to 0.8. It's just a preview material, and assign it to everything. Let's see if that doesn't take too long. And this should work. Now, what will we do next? Maybe we can introduce the fog. So let's do a SOP import. And we will load in from the obj object. I didn't create an output, so we can go in here. Fog. Create a null. Fog. Let's copy this and paste it in here. This is our fog. Now we will need also a material library for the fog. And I'm also going to create a switch so I can enable and disable the fog. And now merge this in. So this should work. Now let's look and do some rendering. This is how it looks so far, but we want to change in the material of the fog. So in this case, we will use a Karma Cloud material. So let's create that. Karma Cloud material. And we will assign it. And I'm going to increase the density to something like, let's see how that looks. Now, as you can see, the fog is terminating over there, is not big enough. But it won't be too noticeable in the final render when we scatter the trees, so let's keep it like that for now. So now I'm noticing that the fog is also terminating on the bridge, so we might need to increase it. So let's go into the object level and go into fog, and here in the bound we can increase this upper padding to 2 along the Y, so we have a bit more. And maybe let's also, so on the X, can increase this to something like 2 and 2. Oh, not the Z, sorry. 2 and 2 in here. Let's see if that works a bit better. So let's go into Solaris, stage. That should work a bit better if we look at our camera and do some rendering. And now it's covering all the necessary areas as I see it. So yeah, that is working fine. Now we probably will start to work on the scattering of the trees and the rocks, so let's do that next. So let's just check in here something on the trees, plants and trees. So we don't actually have a name, so let's create a name in here for the tree. And in this case, I call this tree trunk. Oops, tree trunk. And in here we can call it tree lips. And we have out tree 1. Fine. And we can copy this and go to the stage and start to do the instancing of our trees. So for that I'm going to create a component geometry to create the proxy and whatnot. So I'm gonna do an object merge and paste this in here. In this case we only have one tree, so we should have a look in here. Yes, and let's create a bound, and this will be our proxy. So that's fine. Now we can just create a component geometry variance in case we have more variations. I'm just going to use 1, so I'm going to set it to number and 1. That's fine. Create a component geometry output, so component output, and I'm going to name it trees and do an explore variance. That's fine. And now let's create an instancer. Connect it to the first input. And let's dive inside. Let's disable this, and we will first of all object merge the terrain, or the terrain back, I mean. So object merge, and we will go in, let me see. So I don't think I named that. So if we go in here, object merge, we should have a terrain back. So in this case is name tree. So I'm gonna pick here name tree, and we will scatter a few points. In this case I think we can just go into the obj, and we have here the scattering of the trees. So where is that? This is the rocks, and these are the trees. So we can just copy these from here, Control C. Let's go again into the stage and paste these in here. So create the normal, the scatter, in this case 32, the B scale. We have the normals and the randomization of the normals. Let's see if that is working. It is. So if we actually create an output in here, let's organize this, and we go out, and now we need to set in here explore variants, trees and everything, and we should have that. Now we need to prune the original tree, so let's do a prune and do the trees in here. That's fine. Now let's create the materials also. Let's have that material library there and merge over this in here. And we should have something like this, which is not ideal. So why is it over there? So let's go again in here in the instancer. So we have them at the center, that's fine. Now let's go in the instancer. Maybe when I'm, so this is name tree. Let's go in here. So oh, it's not this one, sorry. It's the background in here. So name 9. Sorry about that. So we go in here. We should have named that properly. So now we should work better. So we prune the tree, merge it over, and now it's looking something like that. Let's disable the grid and look at the render and do some simple rendering. So everything seems to be working. Now we will do the scattering of the rocks. So in this case we can maybe copy from here and have a similar setup. So let's copy this and let's do in here an object merge. And in this case we will have 20 variations of rocks, I believe. So let's see how many do we have. So if we go to the obj and assets, not assets, sorry, we go into rocks. Let's see how many do we have in here. In this case we only have 7. Oh, I was looking at other geometry. So in this case I think we can bring in the rocks as part of our environment. So let's go again to our obj and we can bring in the rocks. So let's look in here and let's bring in the rocks. Make sure this is spec instance. And we can get rid of these. And let's play with the seeds of these. And let's maybe do the low poly. So I reduce the amount of points, the amount of rocks, and change to the seeds. And if we have a look at the iPoly, we should have something like this. And now we can just do a name in here. Let's see, do we have a name? No, we can just name in here. And in this case, we want to do it after. So now we should have a name for the rocks. And let's save that out again. So let's save to disk. And now we have the rocks already scattered. That's one way you can do it, or you can import these into Solaris and do the scattering again. But in this case, I will choose this way and only scatter the trees and the grass. So let's go back to Solaris. And we should have the rocks right now. And we should also have the trees. We can actually delete these because we won't use it. And let's see how that looks. So now we have everything ready to look into the materials, so the shading, and also do some scattering of grass elements in here. And yeah, let's do that next. So before we move into the materials, I also want to create some sort of cloud gobo on these environments, above the environment, to create some nice interactive shadows. So I'm gonna disable this fog for now to have a more responsive feedback. So in here we can actually create a sub create, and let's name it clouds gobo, and we will do the following. We'll create a grid that will be around 25 by 25, so quite big to cover the full environment. Rows and columns will be fine. We will just subdivide it quite a bit. So subdivide. In this case, I'm gonna set it to 3, and we can increase it later. Now let's do an attribute noise float, and let's name that mask, and look at the result. As you can see, we don't have enough resolution, but let's see. Let's increase this to 5. And we will change the element size to something like 0.9. And we will also play with the offset, so you can pick a different seed. In this case I chose 25. And I'm also going to play with the output ramp, so I can have a more defined look. So in this case I'm gonna increase this one to 0.5 something and move this one a bit in, so we can create these cloud shapes. Now we can just blast and say points, and at mass is bigger than 0.9 or smaller than 0.9. So smaller than 0.9, we get something like this. We can also delete small parts, and default settings will be fine, and create an output. So something like this. You can play with the seed and the size of the clouds. As you can see, you can have more or less, and play with the offset. That's fine. Now I'm going to merge these in. So you can actually get the materials in here. And this will be over our environment, so let's place a transform. I'm going to move this up to about 3.5 and also move this a bit back. You can leave it like that. Now let's create a material. We will need a material for this, and we don't want to render these clouds, so we don't want them visible in our camera. So we can do render geometry settings, and we will look into the shading and set in here the render visibility to primary. So no, invisible to primary rays. So that's it. And now let's have a look at how it renders. Let's see if it creates some nice shadows. And we also need to enable the fog. So let's name this fog. Now it's playing. So let's reset the viewport. That's fine. Let's make sure we have viewport size. That's fine. And let's render this. So let's actually see if that is creating anything in here. So if we move this down, now it's over. Why is that rendering? So let's make sure we select the primitives. Oh, now it's working great. And we can actually move this up a bit more. So 3. And as you can see, it's creating some shadows in there. We could probably play with the seed of these clouds. And it's also creating some fake code rays. Let's make sure this is actually creating something. Let's create a switch and create a null. And let's disable this. As you can see, it's pretty flat. And when we introduce the clouds, we have some more spots of darkening. And we can play with an opacity material to remove some of that opacity, to remove some of the influence. So we can actually go in here and create a karma material builder. Let's disable this. And let's call this clouds matte. And I always like to put these in caps. And we can do the following. We can go into the opacity. And we can go in here into the opacity and reduce the influence of that darkening. So let's set that to 0.9, 0.9 and 0.9, and assign this to this material, to this geometry. And let's see how that looks in the end. So I guess I will leave it like that, and Now we can finally start to work on the materials. So to create the materials for the terrain, I will take advantage of the Karma triplanar nodes, which will work better for this situation. Let's disable the fog to make this a bit faster, and we can also disable the instancing. So let's create another switch so we can copy from here, and let's connect that in here, and that way we can disable the scattering, so we can enable and disable. So that's fine. Now my idea is to use the triplanar for the terrain, for the terrain material. So that means we can create in here a Karma material builder, and let's call it terrain mat. And we can start to create a triplanar and load in the map, but we also need the textures for the normal, the roughness, and the displacements. And we will need to link these parameters to all the nodes, to all the different textures. So I have a script that I shared before in the channel, and I will link the video in the description, which creates these automatically. So I just need to, let's go in here. And in this case, I think I need to be on the material library, I guess, and create in here. Let's load in. This is the material I'm going to use, rock cliff, and if you paste this code on bridge, you can download the same texture, and it will create in here. So I can just copy the name, delete these nodes, and name it terrain mat. And what this will do is to create different textures, as you can see, for the and connect it to the material. And as you can see, the parameters are all linked. So if I change the size in here, it will change the same on the specular, the normal, and the displacement. So now let's actually work a bit on the materials. So let's see if we can actually visualize it. If I create this material and assign it to the terrain. So in this case, terrain. Do we visualize anything? So if we look in here, and I think it's because we have the displacement on. So if we disable this displacement, we should be able to visualize it better. Let's set it to default shading. And now, I don't want random rotation, as I want this layered look. I want to change the size to 2, and we can play with a different seed, and also increase the triplanar blend to something like that. So this will propagate to the roughness map, as you can see, and the normal. In this case, I don't think I used normal, or did I? I did. And I'm just going to make sure I'm using 0.1, that's fine. And now we will need to mix this between the rock texture and the grass texture. So I'm just going to duplicate this albedo one and load in a grass texture. So in this case will be this one, grass wild, and you can copy this code. And I'm going to mix this, and I'm just going to mix the albedo. And so we can take this from background and this as foreground, and we can use a geo property value, or USD primvar reader is the same. And in this case, I think I call it mask grass. Let's see if that works out. So if I connect this to the base color, yeah, mask grass. And if you have questions, you can always go in here and look at the different primvars you have. So in this case, terrain, we should have in here a mask grass, as you can see. So that's fine. We have the blending. Now we need to do some color correction also. So let's do a color correct. And I'm not even rendering right now, but we will do that in a bit. So I'm going to color correct both textures. And maybe it's a good idea now to do the rendering. So if we get in here, and let's look at the final shading, disable this, we won't need it any longer. And let's do some rendering. So right now it's too dark, as you can see, and it's also compiling and whatnot. And let's wait for the compiling, and we will do some changes to the color correction. So let's go in here to the material library, and let's increase first of all the terrain, so the rock texture. Let's increase the exposure to 1. We should start to see something, and let's also increase the exposure of the grass, something like 2. And I also changed a bit the contrasts, so in this case of the rock, so point just a little bit to have more contrast, and the rest I think I left it to default. I'm going to increase the saturation of these grass texture, so about 1.15 to have this more green look, and I might also play with these clouds. So let's disable this just to check something. It won't make much difference. It's just creating some darkening on the terrain. So now we need to work on the displacement, because right now it's too flat. So for that, I have the displacement. So in this case, let me see. So if I look in here, we should have the displacement in here. And we have the same settings, so that should align perfectly. So let's separate these into a float. So separate color 4. And we will remap, since it's a megascan texture, so we can remap it between -0.5 and 0.5. And we also don't want displacement on the grass, so for that we will take this grass mask and invert it, and we can just multiply these over. So if we connect that to the displacement, and in this case I used a value for the displacement about 0.3. We won't see the preview, at least I always have that problem. Let's see how that looks. So it will compile for a bit and initialize, and as you can see, it's creating these nice displacements on our terrain, as you can see around here also, and on these parts. And let's actually introduce the fog to see if that looks a bit better. Let's wait for a bit. And this is how it looks with the fog. It looks a bit better, and it starts to integrate our environment. So, and this grass texture won't be that visible because we will scatter some grass. But for now, we can start maybe to work on the material for this little river. So let's do that next. So for the material of the river, we will just do a simple displacement or normal map. That will work just fine. So let's create a texture first. So in a copnet, I'm gonna call it water noise. Now let's just create a fractal 3D noise. Let's disable the pinning, and I'm going to increase this or to decrease this, something like this, and also decrease the roughness as I don't want it super rough. So something like this, and create a null, and let's name it out disp. In this case I'm going to use displacement. Let's copy that and go into our material. Let's create a Karma material builder and name it water mat. Let's disable this, and we will load an image and do it as a float OP and load in that displacement. Let's connect that to the displacement. As for the material, we will change it to a water shader. So in this case, I'm not even going to bother using displacement. We can just use in here normal map. So normal map, and we will need to create a normal from that texture. So in this case, let's go in here and let's do out normal and create an height from normal, height to normal, and let's reduce the scale to 0.1, 0.05, oops, 0.05. So something like this. Let's copy this. And we were here. Let's load this as a vector tree, and it already loads in the texture. Let's connect this to the normal, and we can change the scale quite a bit. So let's load that to the normal. Let's create a water material, so we can just set the roughness to really low, increase the transmission, and let's see what we do next. So let's assign this, and let's connect in here the geometry, so the water geometry. Let's have a look at that. And I don't have the scattering of the trees, that's fine. Let's look at the final result. So in this case is reflecting quite a bit, but we might need to change the bump amount. So let's decrease this to 0.3. And as you can see, it's losing the reflections quite a bit. And when we introduce the trees, if we enable the trees, so if I go in here and enable the trees and do some rendering, so as you can see with the trees rendering in the background, we lose almost all of the reflection. So I'm gonna cheat a little bit and introduce a light in here. So I'm gonna create a light, and it's going to be a rectangle light. Let's have a look at that. Maybe we can disable this fog for now. Let's select that light and rotate it like this, and also increase the size and increase this along this axis and decrease in here, and we can move it up, rotate it. So we just want to illuminate the river or this small pond. So I guess this will be fine. Let's see how that renders with the fog. And as you can see, it's also illuminating the entire environment, which I don't want. So I'm gonna create a light linker. And let's see, I want this light, and I want just to affect the water. So let's connect it in here. Let's see how that looks. Now it should remove the lighting on the other objects. The displacement is taking quite a bit, so we can probably disable it. So as you can see, now it's creating those nice reflections. And since I lost a bit of the recording and had to do this part again, I believe I also changed in here the bump amount. So in this normal map I decrease it to 0.3, let's decrease it to 0.1. See if that looks a bit better, and I guess it does. Maybe 5. And we could also probably decrease the intensity of the light. So let's go in here and increase this to 0.5. We want it really subtle. As you can see, we just want a hint that this is some water in here. So I guess this will work fine and we can move on. So now let's do the material for the bridge, so this stone. And for that, we will go again into this material library. And we will load another Megascans, and we will use triplanar again. So I'm going to use my script, and I'm going to use this material in here. So I'm going to create that, and I'm going to name it Stone Bridge Mat. And let's see, I'm gonna use the roughness, the normal, but no displacement. So I can just delete this one. And in the albedo, let me see what sort of size did I use. In this case, we can assign it to the geometry. So in this case, to the bridge stones, and see how that looks. Let's disable the fog for now. And we might need to change the size. So in this case, I'm going to increase it to 2.5. And I'm also going to reduce the random rotation and play with the seed. Something like this. And I can also play with the triplanar blend so it blends better around the corners. Now I'm going to color correct this, so color correct. And in this case, I'm gonna reduce the saturation to 0.9. And as for the gain and hue, I'm gonna change that with an attribute. But for now, let's increase the exposure to 1.5. Otherwise, it will be too dark. But let's keep it like that for now, and we will work on that in a bit. So let's load an attribute with the geometry property value. And if you remember, we have that integer class attribute. And we can actually create a random float. So material random float. And we can load that in and load that for the gain. And of course we won't have a visualization. So what we can do is to let's disable those clouds and those trees and have a look at it. So let's render. And we should have disabled the displacement also, otherwise it will take a while to load in. So let's go into that stone bridge. And as you can see, it will be too dark. So we can right away increase the exposure to 1.5. And we need to play with this random float. So in this case, for the gain, I'm gonna play with the seed. As you can see, we can play in here with the seed. And I'm gonna set the minimum to be around 0.5. So it just darkens a little bit. And I'm also going to create another random float from this. And this one, it will be connected. I'm going to change the seed, and this one will be connected to the hue. And that will just get random colors, so we need to play with the range in here. So in this case, I'm going to set the minimum to be around 0.9 and the maximum to be around 1.02. This is really sensitive, so you need to play with the values. And we get something along those lines, which looks all right. Let's, in this case, I don't think I changed anything else. We could probably play with the normal in here, so let's increase that to 1. We start to get a bit more detail. Let's load in the trees and the fog, and I have a look how it renders. Forgot to put in the trees, so let's load those in because it will darken significantly the environment. Let's actually make sure I enable these trees. As you can see, it's a bit darker, but maybe we can decrease the exposure in here. Instead of 1.5, I might decrease it. So in the color correct to 1.2, let's see. This will be a bit darker. And maybe it's a good idea that we introduce a denoiser. So let's go in here in the image output filters and increase, in this case we can use the NVIDIA one. And we can also do the material for the pet. So let's do that next. So we can actually apply the same material for for the pet. So let's go in here and we can just say bridge pet, and it should assign the same material. Let's have a look at that. And let's see, we can maybe also assign the same terrain material to the back. So in here we assign this to the terrain. So let's do scene and we do terrain back. So in this case scene, and let's have a look at that. So in this case I had a crash at the beginning of the recording and lost the material of the fog now that I see it. So we can just create in here a karma cloud material, and let's disable this, and we will increase the density to 2 and assign it to the fog. So let's autofill and assign it, and let's have a look at how that renders out. It should have a bit more intensity on the fog and it will look a bit darker. So as you can see, this fog material works a bit better and it darkens a bit this part of the environment. We could probably increase it a bit more, but let's work next on the materials for the trees, the rocks, and these vines. And in the end we will do the scattering of the grass. So I think right now I'm going to do the scattering of the grass, so we can start to have a look at how it will look in the end. And for that I'm going to duplicate this scattering system I have in here, and we will work from there. So let's duplicate this, and in this case we will have 20 variations if you remember from our assets in here. So as you can see, we have in here the assets and we have 20 variations. So let's go into the stage and load that in there 20. And in this case, we will load in from the assets. So let's go in assets and load the var1. And in this case, we will take advantage of the geo variant index. So let's open these backticks and do it at geo variant index, and we will increase to 1. And we should have that load. So let's do geo variant index, geometry variants. Let's name this grass. So grass and explore variants, and we should have all the grass variants in here. So that's fine. And now let's do the instancing. So for that I'm going to load the terrain. So let's go in here and we will object merge the out terrain. We should have that in here, and we will just blast the terrain. We don't need the water, and what are we visualizing in here? So that's fine. Now I will create an attribute in here so we can use later on the on shading. So attributes noise float. I'm gonna call this seed. Let's visualize that. And in this case I'm going with an element size of 0.56. So decrease that, and it will be positive. That's fine. Now let's mix the attribute wrangle. Let's mix the river mask with the grass mask so we can scatter only on those parts. In this case I want to remove the river from the, so let's have a look at the mask grass. As you can see, we have also on the river, so I want to remove from there. So for that I'm going to create a mask grass. It will be multiplied by the inverted of the river, since we also have a river mask, and we should have that. So that is fine. Now we will do the scattering. So we can actually do the normals and do the scattering, and we will scatter on the mask grass. We are scattering on the mask, and I'm gonna change this to density, and let's see, 100, 1000, 2500, so something like that. We will have 80,000 points. That's fine. Can play with seeds, but I'm not going to bother. As for the P scale, I'm going to use, in this case, a noise. So in this attribute adjust float, I'm going to use a noise, call it P scale, and I'm going to change the element size. So in this case, I'm going to change the element size to 0.25, and we can play with the offset. And the rest is fine, I guess. Noise pattern simplex. And now let's do the final P scale. So if we go in here to constant, we can reduce it quite a bit to 0.003. As for the normal, we can do the same. So if we decrease this, so in the scatter, let's decrease this. And let's have a look at the normal. And it should be randomized, yes. So that's fine. We can probably play with the seed, just. And now let's have a look at how that renders. So let's increase this to 2500. And in the instancer, we need explore, variants 2, and grass, and all the instances. So let's prune in the grass, and we will assign the materials later. So let's merge these in. Let's first of all make sure this is working, and it is. Let's reset the viewport just in case. So that should be working. Let's have a look, and let's do a render. And let's make sure, let me make sure I enable these in here. So the cloud combo is enabled, that's fine. And let's do a render. So it will help if we do actually create a material for the grass, but as you can see, the scale is correct. And let's do now the material for the grass. So grass, and I'm using Megascans asset, so it should be as simple as loading the texture. So let's do a Karma material builder and creating here a grass mat. I'm going to load in the albedo. So let's do an image, and it will be on color, and this is the albedo from the atlas. Let's load in as a base color, and we will also do a color correct. And we will duplicate this and load in the roughness, and load that in as a specular roughness. And we will also load in, duplicate the albedo and load in the translucency. And let's connect that to the subsurface color. Let's make sure we increase the subsurface. So in this case I set it to 0.6, and we will use thin wall since this is single-sided geometry. And we will also need a color correct on these. So let's connect that. So subsurface color, and I will need to increase the exposure quite a bit. So in this case I'm going to increase the exposure to 2 and 2.5 on the translucency. Let's see how that renders. If that doesn't take too much to load, let's make sure we set this to viewport size, and the rest is fine. We might decrease the viewport size so it doesn't take so much to render, since I'm on a 4K monitor. Let's actually make sure we assign this in here. So Let's assign this to all the geometry. And as you can see, the material and the values are working nice. We just need maybe to play with the U, I guess. I'm going to randomize the U from that noise we created. So for that, I'm going in here and I'm going to geo property value and load in that seed noise that we had. And we can create a random float from this random float. And in this case, let's leave it like that and load that in as a U vector. So if we load that in as a U, not multiplier, as a vector, let's see, as you can see, it's not working great. So we need to play with the range in here. In this case, we can go with a range of 0.9 and maybe 0.95. I don't want it so orange, and 1.05. And as you can see, some patches are more towards yellowish and others more green. Maybe decrease this a bit. I don't want it so green. So I guess this will work fine. And that's basically our scattering done. We just need to work on the few materials that are left. So let's do that next. So now let's do the final materials. I'm gonna start by disabling this fog and do the materials for the trees. So we have it grass, trees. So let's create the camera material builder and let's do tree, leaves, mat. I'm gonna load an image and it will be the same image. Let's disable for now the grass because it's getting too slow. And it will be the same image we used for preview purpose on the on SOPs. So it's in here, tree leaves mat, and I'm gonna load it. It will be this albedo. I'm right away going to color correct and connect it to the base color, loading the roughness and loading as color the translucency. I'm gonna reference copy this color correct, connect it to the subsurface color and this one to the roughness. I'm gonna enable thin walled, and for the subsurface I'm gonna set it to, in this case, 2.4. And in the color correct I'm gonna just increase the exposure a bit, or quite a bit. Let's actually apply that to the leaves. And we can also do, let's actually increase this exposure to 1.8 and do the material for the bark. So karma and bark mat. And this one I will just load in texture from Megascans. So it will be this one in here, this tree bark. There's an old section in there. So I'm gonna color correct. Gonna load in the roughness. So roughness to the specular roughness. I'm also going to load in the normal, so vector tree and normal, create a normal map and connect this to the normal input. I believe that's all. And for the material, we can just set this one to 1.5 for the exposure. Let's see that and assign that to the bark or trunk. Is it trunk I called it? Let me see. Render tree leaves, tree trunk. Yeah, that is fine. Let's have a quick look at this. As you can see, without the fog, that is working properly there. Let's introduce the fog and see how that looks. So let's make sure we have everything enabled, and we, in this case, this is the grass, so let's also have a look at that. So we won't notice much color going through there due to the fog, but it will have an hint. So now let's work on the material for the rocks. So let's disable some of these instances, and let's go in here to the material. And in this case, I'm going to use again a triplanar to texture these rocks. So I'm going to click on here, and I'm going to load the mega scans again, this time with this rocky mossy. You can copy the code as always. Let's load that in, and let's go these rocks matte. And we need to figure out in here, we need to separate color bar, since we just want the float, and remap it. So remap between -0.5 and 0.5, and we will also change the displacement. So in this case I just want 0.07, it will be enough. And I'm also going to change the size in here, set it to 2, and going to color correct it a bit. So from this albedo you can create a color correct, and I'm going to increase the exposure to 1.25 and maybe change the U to 0.036, something like this. Let's assign this to the rocks, so let's autofill, and in this case we have leaves and rocks. So if we assign this to rock, it should assign to the rocks. Let's have a look at the render. Let's disable the shelf. So, and this is the final material for our rocks. It looks somewhat decent. I'm just gonna leave it like that. Now we just need to work on the material for the vines. So let's do that and do the final render, because you're probably tired of hearing me back and forth. So for the vines, we will create one for the vines itself. So carve a material builder and name it vines matte. And in this case, we will use another bark from Megascans. So let's create an image, and I'm going to use this one in here. I'm going to, as always, color correct and connect it to the base color. Load in as float the roughness, so roughness, connect that to the specular roughness. I'm also going to load the normal in this case, so normal, and connect this to a normal map and connect it in here. Let me see if I changed the scale. No. And I'm just going to decrease the gain in this case to 0.5, since I want it quite dark. Let's duplicate this one, alt drag, and call it leaves matte. And for this one, we will use the same atlas texture we used on SOPs. So I'm just going to select all of these, change this to color, and paste in here this albedo. It should paste on all. And now we have the albedo. We should have a roughness, and we should have, in this case I don't want any normal, so I'm going to duplicate this and load in the translucency. Going to Control Alt Shift drag to create a reference copy and paste this as subsurface color. So subsurface color. As for the subsurface, I'm gonna set it, in this case can be the same as the leaves from the trees to 0.4, and make sure it's thin walled. And the color correction. We need actually to increase in here the exposure. So I'm gonna set to a value of 3.2, and I'm gonna play. In this case, I'm gonna reset the gain and change the hue. I want it slightly more green. So this is a very sensitive parameter. So I'm gonna set it to something like that. Let's see how that looks. So if we actually assign this, so let's set it to vines, and as you can see, it loaded the texture in. Now we can assign this to the leaves. So that is not loading. Let me see in here. So if I go into scene, vines, and I have the instances leaves. So let me see if that is our material binding. Yeah, it's binding, so it should be working. But since it's an instance, it's not displaying properly. So this should be working. Let's enable the grass. This one is enabled. This one is also enabled. Let's enable the fog. Let's disable the fog for now and just see how that looks, if it's loading the materials or not. So it's not loading the materials. Let's have a look on why is that. So in this case, we need to be a bit more specific on here. So in here, we can do the following. We can load in these instances and just do wildcards. Will that work? So instances, prototypes, leaves. Will that work? Let's have a look in here. And it's not working. Do we have... Are we binding? So result preview material, result full material. Do we have UVs? So let's go into the object, geo, and we do have UVs. So why is it not working? Oh, I know why. Because we have this default material that is probably... Let's disable this default material. And let's disable this one. Oh, as you can see, it's working now. So the default material was causing an issue there. Let's have a look and see if that works now. It should be loading the material, as you can see. And now let's do the final render. So let's increase this. Let's get more samples and maybe play with the SSS limit, and let's see how that looks. So do we have the fog? Let's Control S and see how that looks. So I might want to reduce the exposure on those leaves because it's too much, I believe. So I'm going in here on the leaves, and I'm going to decrease this to 2.75. Let's see if that doesn't take too long. Now might be too dark, so let's increase it to 3. And I guess this will be my final render. I will just maximize the view and we will have a look at the final result. So let's just maximize these in here and do a final render. So guys, this is more or less the final render. I just paused at like 40% because it would take a little bit longer to render everything at 4K. So it's not a perfect environment, but hopefully you picked up a few techniques, and it's up to you now to leverage another level of these environments and create something better. So I hope you have enjoyed this series. It was quite a bit of work to put it together, but in the end I think it's worth the effort. If you find this useful, please let me know in the comments, and don't forget I also have a Patreon where you can download all the files from my videos, including this one, along with exclusive tutorials and also some courses I have in there. So with that in mind, thank you for watching, and I guess I'll see you next time. Thank you.